İyi akşamlar. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Welcome all. Bu hafta Orta Doğu üzerinde fotoğraf koruması üzerinde çalışma yapan MEP'inin workshop'unu ağırlıyoruz SALT'ta. Burada bu konuda uzmanlar varken herkese açık bir konuşma yapmanın iyi olacağını düşündük ve fotoğrafı her şekliyle, bütün formlarıyla tartışmaya açıyoruz bu akşam. 3 konuğumuz var. Biri Debra Hess Norris, University of Delaware'de sanat ve fotoğraf koruma alanında öğretim görevlisi. Nora Kennedy, Metropolitan Museum of Art'ta Fairchild Fotoğraf Konservatörü ve Tayfun Serttaş, sanatçı, yazar. Sanıyorum hepinizin bildiği Stüdyo OSEP ve Foto Galatasaray arşiv çalışmaları ve kitaplarıyla tanınıyor. Üçü de aslında fotoğrafın koruması, fotoğrafın sergilenmesi birazcık da Türkiye'de fotoğraf tarihi bağlamında bize anlatacak ve sorularınıza cevap vermeye çalışacak. Konuşmaya geçmeden ufak bir teknik bilgi. 1 numara Arapçadır, 2 numara Türkçe, 3 numara ise İngilizce içinde. Buyurun.
Good evening, everyone. It's really lovely. It's a pleasure to be back in Istanbul again. And thank you so much for all coming out this evening to hear about the many different aspects of photography. Thanks so much to our hosts here at SALT, and especially to Wasif Kortun, Director of Research and Programs, and also to Laurence Baru, who you just heard, the Associate Director. I'd also like to extend our warmest gratitude to our intrepid interpreters, Joyce, Rana, and tonight also Kenan. We would be lost without you. And finally, thanks go to the incredible technical team here who have set up this magnificent spotlight so we can stand and speak, but also apparently for the first time have 3 channels for translation. We have these English, Arabic, and Turkish, and apparently that is a first for SALT. So especially to Adem from the technical team at SALT and Oaz from Centro. What some of you may not be aware of is that SALT has generously hosted us for this entire week. And by us, I mean the MEPI course. MEPI is a 3-year initiative. Let me get rid of this. Uh-oh. Have we lost our visuals? Well, I'll tell you about MEPI. Oh, there we go. Whoops. MEPI is a 3-year initiative that is funded in part by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and it works in partnership with the University of Delaware, the Arab Image Foundation in Beirut, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where I work, and then also the Getty Conservation Institute in Los Angeles. How's it going? We have gathered here, thank you, super. The goals of the MEPI, or the Middle East Photograph Preservation Initiative, are to raise awareness about the importance of photography, to build networks throughout the region, to develop tools and resources, and finally to train individuals in caring and preserving their important photograph collections. And this is throughout the Middle East, North Africa, Turkey, and Iran. So this week we have gathered 12 participants from 8 different countries, and by this time all of them are old friends. And they are learning how to, they're actually refreshing their existing knowledge on identifying historic photographic processes, and also doing some experiments, testing papers and plastics for their suitability for housing photographic materials properly. And you can see they're having some fun doing this. Now, all of these individuals will be going back to their countries, sharing this information, this new knowledge, with individuals in their institutions, but also with the broader public within their cities and their countries. As you've heard, I come from the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. We have 3 speakers tonight, and we're trying to keep it to about 15 minutes each. So what I'll be offering is really just a small taste, just a little flavor of what we do at the Metropolitan Museum with regard to photography and how we preserve it, conserve it, and celebrate it. In the museum, there are 17 different curatorial departments, one of which is the Department of Photographs, and this is where the collection of fine art photographs resides within the museum. As you will see, there are other photographs in the museum as well. Our photography collection is famous for being, well, we like to say, it's encyclopedic. And that is that it comes from the earliest time in photography, shown here in a work by William Henry Fox Talbot, one of the inventors of the medium, a very early photograph, photographs on paper, but also on metal, like this daguerreotype portrait of a very famous American Frederick Douglass in its lovely little intimate miniature case. Photographs from the 19th century, really from all parts of the world, although I will say that some parts of the world are less well represented than others, and that's something we are seeking to address. Photographs into the 20th century, the early 20th century. This is an early example of a color photograph that is my colleague Debbie's favorite photograph in the collection. Into the modernist period with Paul Strand, and up until the present day, represented here by James Welling, this image from 2006, and also these images. You know, you can say, well, are these really photographs? And that certainly is a question, but they entered the collection some time ago. They were made in 1999 at a time when this type of 3-dimensional printing was not as common as it is now. Now one can get a printer for one's home. And then moving into the future, we also have a lot of time-based media, or there are various names, variable media, but basically works that are not physically present, works that are on videotape or electronically based, and in this case, it's a moving image, and this is just a representation of it. We also, it is not our habit, but we also do have a couple of archives, namely those of the important American photographers Walker Evans and Diane Arbus. So in the case of Diane Arbus, for example, we have all of her negatives, we have many, many prints. We also have her library, her cameras, enlarger, and so on. An incredibly rich resource to study the full work of one artist. But again, collecting archives is not really our emphasis. I mentioned the other curatorial departments, and they too have holdings of photographs. They tend to be photographs more of the documentary nature that show aspects that highlight aspects of the other artworks in their collection. The one on the right here is from Asian art, as an example. And then there are the photograph studio, digital media, and the archives that either are actively making photographs, documentary photographs, or actively collecting them. And I'll give some examples of these coming up. So the arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, one curatorial department. I use it as an example because they have a substantial collection of photography. And as you see in this image, it's often used to document, in this case, the spirit boards that would be part of the collection. It shows them in the countries where they were made, sometimes being made, sometimes in use. The line gets a little bit, it becomes a bit gray in the case of this one, which does document a spirit board, but only a partial spirit board, and is really a beautifully composed image. So we're starting to head off in an artistic direction. And then this final example by Malik Sidibe from Mali is definitely a work of art, and this is in the AAOA, as we call it, department. So they are reaching out also and going beyond the bounds of documentary photography. The photograph studio, where we have photographers actively documenting the Metropolitan Museum. This is obviously an early shot. This is from 1909, and the domes that you see here, when you enter the museum and you look up in the Great Hall, you'll see 3 large domes. And these are the domes above which the photographers work to this day, although it looks very different now. Here's more, it's not as romantic, I agree, but this is more what we see today, all digital, and these photographers, of course, documenting artworks from relatively small items to the very large, the Temple of Dendur that is indoors. Also, staff activities, the public, renovations, they document the history of the museum, and their negatives and now their digital files, we assist in that preservation effort. Now I'll turn to photograph conservation. These, if I were to have to use 5 words, these would be the 5 words that I would use to describe what it is that we do. Conservation, preservation, research, advocacy, and education. And again, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to spin through just a few examples of each one. We're really hoping that if we each limit it to 15 minutes, that we'll hear from you, because that is what we enjoy. We want to hear your views, your opinions, your interests. So we'll rush through the presentations. Preservation, one of our most important functions is caring for the collection, doing our best to fight against the ravages of time and of use. One of the ways to do this is with proper housing. Here you see the Cadillac of housings, a window mat and mount, and here plastic sleeves used more for documentary photographs of lesser value. We also do education within the museum. We show people how they should handle a photograph carefully so that it does not become damaged. You'll see coming up that these very traditional housing methods, sometimes with contemporary photography, are no longer valid. They just are no longer appropriate. Here, specialized housings. These are the 3-dimensional figures that you saw earlier. They have these very odd-looking housings. And then storage for the Malik Sidibe. Again, we have to make a special housing to accommodate the glass and the cardboard that is part of the work of art. We monitor temperature, relative humidity here in the photograph studio's cool storage vault, and of course, cold, cool storage is something that we strive for internationally. If you keep something cool and dry, it will last a longer time. We also monitor light levels in the galleries. We make sure that they're not too bright, that there's no ultraviolet component, and we also try to moderate the length of exhibitions. We don't show things for too long a time. In addition to that, however, we monitor the photographs themselves. So Katie Sanderson, you see, she's got an instrument here, and she is taking a measurement of the density of this color photograph. and has taken measurements of photographs throughout the collection, whether from the 19th, 20th, 21st century. And then we measure them again months later, years later, and determine how much they've changed and whether that relates to the exhibitions that they've been in or to the storage or to other factors. We are, as you can imagine, a very exhibition-heavy institution. Exhibitions are our raison d'être. At the moment, we have a beautiful small exhibition of Julia Margaret Cameron's work. In our contemporary galleries, we're showing Everyday Epiphanies, these two curated by, the last by Malcolm Daniel and this by Doug Eklund. And then we just took down photography and the American Civil War, a huge exhibition of very small photographs showing the relationship between photography and the American Civil War. This has now traveled to Charleston in the south of the country, and we're installing it there, after which it goes to New Orleans. Another trend at the museum is that exhibitions are not just about photographs. Photographs of, for example, in this case, paintings. This was earlier in the year, which included indeed also costumes. A great example here of the actual costume that this woman was wearing when she was painted. This exhibition included a large number of photographs as well, and the Met is doing that more and more. They're mixing all types of media together, I think to very good effect. It does make more work for us, but that is a pleasure. Conservators do treatment, and usually, I mean, this is usually in response to a request for exhibition. This is one example. Before treatment, you can see that there are, there we go. There are some pieces that have come off, there's some losses, and those are reintegrated during conservation treatment. Here's a close-up of just one of the foot. I have to say this is a very unusual example. Most of the photographs in our collection are in extraordinarily good condition. And so this we keep in the conservation lab as an example of before and after treatment, because it's rare we get to do something that extensive. Many of the treatments are more like this, and I don't know if you can even see this from the back, but there's a little white dot here, and that has been in-painted on the right side. Very much an aesthetic treatment, does really nothing for the long-term stability, doesn't harm it, and is completely reversible. Another part of our function is documentation. And to help us with this, we have something called the Photograph Information Record. This is a form that we send out to artists, to dealers, galleries, every time we acquire a photograph. And we ask them to fill in details about what the negative was, how it was printed, whether it came from a digital file. If it's a digital print, we'd like details on the inks that were used, the papers that were used, the printer. Did they print it? Did someone else print it? And this helps us document not only the technical issues, but also the artist's intent, and helps us care for it into the future. This form can be downloaded if you go to the American Institute for Conservation website and then look for photographic materials. There are actually a lot of other good resources there as well. You'll find this form, and you can see it has been translated into a number of languages. However, we are missing Turkish translation, also Arabic, also Farsi. So if any of you are interested in doing some translating, please do be in contact. With contemporary photography, some of the challenges relate just to getting the artwork up on the wall. And I'll show 3 examples. This one, Richard Avedon. This is 2 parts of a 3-part mural. And you can see we have to store it rolled and then hang it up here and unroll it gradually. This example here are riggers, the guys who help us move the art around the building, are mounting a giant light box on the wall, and we then hang this huge color transparency on that. And finally, we turn the lights on, and we have a Jeff Wall hanging on the wall. And finally, this last example is a rather unusual piece by the artist Francesca Woodman, who is deceased. She made this in the 80s. She collaged pieces of what's called diazo paper, an unusual process and not usually found in museums, certainly. But she collaged them together and then mounted them all. This piece is so large that it will not fit in the elevator. We had to take the roll up the stairs. And again, I'm going to run through these quickly just to give you a sense of what was involved just in this one installation. We built a support for this. It had to be put together in the galleries because otherwise it would not fit through the door. There are the aluminum supports going in. That was covered. There were slits cut in it. Paper was rolled out on it. Finally, the photograph was unrolled onto that support. And then I slipped this in because it shows you we used magnets at the top to hold the photograph on, and then there's some paper hinges here to hold the top and the middle. But then again, this takes a carefully orchestrated team of individuals with all types of specializations: carpenters, electricians, the riggers, the curator, of course, conservators, and so on. Hey, it's up. Believe me, it was a big relief when this went up and didn't come down again. Let me focus on one final issue, and then I'll turn the floor over to Debbie, and that is research. Photography is not such an old medium, but there's so much that we do not know about it. So there's always research that needs to be done. One area that we've looked into is the work of Gustave Le Gray, French photographer. This is one of his salted paper prints that has a rather unusual color to it. And so we went back and we mixed up the chemistry in the bad way that he outlined in his manuals. And then we overexposed our salted paper, as you see here. And for the photographers in the group, you'll be horrified to see this 15 hours in exhausted hypo. One would never do that. And one especially would never leave your photograph in for 60 hours. But apparently that's what Le Gray did, because then you get an image with these color tones like this one here, for example. So here we're learning about the way that the photographer is creating the image. Other research that we are engaged in is learning why things change. In this rather horrifying example, a portrait of Lola Montez, a whole plate daguerreotype, looked like this on the left in the 1930s, and then like this in the 1990s. One of our masterworks, so that was not good news. We have worked closely with Silvia Centeno in particular in our Department of Scientific Research, looking into why on earth this might have happened. And again, I won't go into details, but this kind of teamwork, working with scientists, working with people in other areas of specialization, is absolutely critical. And I'll just end that with this absolutely magnificent, very magnified view of the surface of a daguerreotype, which it was done actually by Alejandro Schrott at the IBM Research Labs, and gives us the answer that silver has been printing out on these photographs. The good news was to find out what was happening. The bad news is that we probably cannot do anything to reverse it, unfortunately. I want to thank my team at the Met. Krista Yanka just arrived, Katie, Lisa, and Georgia, and then Anna, standing next to me, is one of our really fabulous collections managers. These guys are working very hard back in the United States so that I can be here in Istanbul. That's a good deal. And I'll end on this upbeat note, an image by Adam Foos, and thank you all for attending, and pass it on to Debbie.
Okay, I'll join Nora in just saying what a pleasure and honor it is to be here. It's a real thrill to be in Istanbul and also to be involved in MEPI. It's been sort of a lifelong dream for Nora and I and others, and I want to especially thank SALT for hosting us, and also the Arab Image Foundation for being such a fantastic partner, along with the Getty Conservation Institute, University of Delaware, and the Metropolitan. It is, I believe, a real model for the world, this work that's being done in terms of building awareness about the preservation of photographic collections. And in fact, we hope to do some similar work in sub-Saharan Africa in the years ahead. No. It's like, has to. If we started here, we would be done in 2 minutes. I'm going to talk about the preservation of family photographs. So we thought we'd try and cover a bunch of different topics. And my remarks are certainly related to what Nora talked about, but I'm going to talk about collections that you might find in your homes and a little bit about how to preserve them. And Rima, can you tell me when 10 minutes are up? Okay, great. Thank you. So, of course, as is true with photographs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you find these wonderful photographs as well in everyone's homes throughout the world. In this case, fantastic silver gelatin, black and white portraits that are treasured, certainly. And one of the great things about being involved in the preservation of photographic collections is everyone relates to these materials. Everyone cares about their preservation. They are a real way to unite communities, to engage individuals in the preservation, not just of photographic materials, but of our cultural heritage. And we try to use that approach in promoting preservation awareness around the world. And here a photograph that I'm very fond of. This is my daughter, Sarah, and she's married this summer, my husband, Bob, and my other daughter, Maggie. And, you know, again, of course, we treasure these because of their memories. But I felt that I really had to show this photograph as well, the groom, Javier Acuna, my new son-in-law, who's fantastic. And I thought if I only show Sarah, Maggie, and Bob, that may not be a good idea. So here's Sarah and Javier following their wedding. And of course, you know, you can't help but smile and get excited when you see these images. And this is another family photograph. This is my grandmother, Mina Hess, who was Norwegian, came to the United States, and of course what she loved to do is look at family photographs. And one important thing, if I was to recommend anything, is to be sure to spend time with your relatives, reviewing these photographs and learning who these individuals are so that they can be treasured by future generations. Grandma passed away when she was 107. And when she was 102, she told me she thought she was getting old. And but what she loved to do until she died was to look at her photographic collections. And by the way, Nora mentioned that I love that image of the coffee drinkers, and that's because I love the image, and I also love coffee. And everyone says, you drink too much coffee, because I do drink a lot, maybe 10 or 12 cups or 13 cups a day. But so did Grandma. She drank coffee until she died, and she died at 107. So I think I'm going to be okay. But anyway, so we understand these materials, and we value them, and we understand that they're vulnerable to deterioration, and it's so important that we work to preserve them, because photographic materials around the world are so important. They enhance scholarship and knowledge. They inspire discourse. They engage public audiences. Again, everyone relates to these materials. They document history, connect cultures globally, which again is why we're so thrilled to be involved in this project, because you can see how important it is to the world, and of course celebrate greatness. But unfortunately, these materials are endangered, and they do deteriorate over time, and we want to do whatever we can to try to mitigate or prevent that damage. Typical damages include, as you see here, this platinum print, which has been torn and damaged at the top layer. Many photographs, of course, are on paper, and they're prone to deterioration, as you see here. In this case, this is what we call a crayon portrait. It's a photographic enlargement that was popular in the United States sort of in the early 20th century. But really, you see crayon portraits from the late 19th to the mid-20th century in a variety of different formats, often hand-colored, which is why they were called crayon portraits. They tend to be a faint, enlarged photographic image that's then retouched and hand-colored. They were often on lightweight papers mounted onto canvas and may be housed improperly, as you see here. But they're treasured by their owners because they are typically the only photograph of someone's great aunt or grandmother or other relative. Photographs also can fade. Many photographs are comprised of silver as a final image material, and silver is prone to deterioration and fading. The fading may occur at the outer edges or across the entire surface, as you see here with both of these albumin prints. And in a more dramatic situation here, a photographic album in which the photographs are pretty consistently badly faded and discolored. This deterioration is caused by exposure to poor environmental conditions, high humidity, high temperature, fluctuations in environmental conditions, and the exposure to airborne pollutants. And so whatever you can do in your home to protect photographs from exposures to high relative humidity and high temperature, you will do a significant amount to preserve them. Color photographs can fade, as we see here. Color photographs are comprised of organic dyes, cyan, magenta, and yellow, and these dyes fade in the dark and they fade in the light. And they fade at differing rates as well, so you begin to get what we call color shifts, as you see here, where photographs appear more magenta or perhaps more cyan. We're not going to talk so much about photographic negatives, but they are incredibly valuable to collectors, to institutions, and to individuals, and they too can be very fragile. Early photographic negatives were on glass, as you see here, and in 1925, we see the introduction of cellulose acetate film base. Cellulose acetate film can shrink as it deteriorates, and the gelatin binder does not, and you get this sort of characteristic channeling and degradation, and this deterioration is caused by exposure to high relative humidity condition. These materials are inherently unstable in the same way that color photographs are. That is, they will deteriorate over time, and the only way to slow down the deterioration of cellulose acetate film and color materials is to house them in cool or cold storage vaults. And you saw a picture of a cool storage vault at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There are a wide variety of photographic processes, and we don't have time to talk about all of them, so I thought I would just highlight a few. The kinds of photographs that you may find in your collections, although in this part of the world, in family photographs, you may not find as many early direct positive processes, but these were the daguerreotype, the amber type, and the tin type. These are photographic processes that are introduced beginning in 1839, 1840, and popular until about 1880 or 1885. They're called direct positive because they're one of a kind. There is no negative. And so in the case of the daguerreotype, which you see here, introduced in France in 1839, the photographer took a piece of light-sensitive silver-plated copper. And so the support, as you saw from Nora's presentation, is a silver-plated copper support, and the final image is a silver mercury gold amalgam. These materials are fragile, and they're typically housed in protective cases, as you see here, and that prevents damage to the daguerreotype plate. Another direct positive process, again, a photograph in which there is no negative, is the tin type or the ferrotype. These are photographs that were produced on iron that was coated with a black lacquer. They're really wonderful, they're great portraits, and they tend to be in relatively good condition because they were lacquered and coated. You see here, they're introduced in 1856, popular until the 1890s, 1895. When you lacquer and coat and varnish photographic materials, you often protect the final image material, in this case silver, from fading and discoloration. Now, the problem, of course, is that coating can deteriorate. But in general, many of these tin types are in good condition. The greatest challenge in the preservation of tin types is the iron support, which can rust or corrode upon exposure to high relative humidity conditions. There are a wide variety of photographic print materials, beginning with the introduction of print photography, 1839, 1840, with the salted paper print. And you certainly will have these in your collections. They may be hand-colored. Many photographs were hand-colored early on, not to this extent necessarily. This is really a beautiful example. But at least a little bit of coloring in the cheeks to make people look lifelike. Because as much as individuals love photography, they had to sort of deal with the fact that they are monochromatic and not full color. There are, as you can see here, a long list of various processes that you may find in your own collections. These processes were popular at different time periods, and you can find this information in many excellent publications on the preservation of photographic materials. In general, when you look at this diagram, you can see that photographs here in the 19th century tend to look brown in color, whereas photographic materials in the 20th century, silver gelatin developing out, which you see here, are more black and white. And this has to do with the way these photographs are made. 19th century photographs were made by what we call printing out. Photographers would take light-sensitive paper, place it in contact with the negative, and out into the sun until the image printed out. With chemically developed or black and white images, these were produced in a dark room. And of course, they're replaced. These are dates of popularity in the 1960s with color photography. Color photography is introduced well before the 1960s, but becomes the dominant process in the 1960s. And of course, what's wrong with this diagram? I have purposely avoided anything digital, but obviously that's what's dominating photography today. So the albumin print is the photographic process that dominates the 19th century. If you have family photographs, and it would be fantastic if you did, from the 19th century, they're likely, not necessarily absolutely true, but likely to be albumin. And this is a photographic process in which the binder is egg white, and the final image material is silver. So you have small particles of silver metal that are suspended in an egg white binder on a lightweight paper support that's typically mounted in some way or another. When they're in good condition, they look like this beautiful baby with really fantastic details in the highlights and sort of a purplish brown color. But as they deteriorate, which is very common with albumin prints, they become more faded, the egg white yellows, it becomes cracked and crazed, and the photographs begin to look as you see here. When you look at this photograph under magnification, then you can see that sort of characteristic cracking of the egg white binder. For our MEPI course, we spent a lot of time looking at photographic print materials, photographic negative materials, to begin to differentiate one from another. And that becomes very important when you're dealing with preservation of large collections, to know if you have albumin prints or silver gelatin printing out papers or collodion chloride printing out papers. In your own family collections, it's nice to know, but it's certainly not mandatory. But one of the ways to identify an albumin print is from this characteristic cracking. The silver gelatin, or the black and white photograph, dominates the 20th century. It's introduced and popular. These are dates of popularity, not dates of introduction. So it's popular from 1895 to 1960. And this image looks very different from that albumin print, right? It's much black. It's black and white. These are coated on a paper support that has a layer that we call baryta, which is a white pigment barium sulfate and gelatin coated on that paper support. You could then buy papers that were very matte or very glossy, depending on the thickness of the paper, depending on the thickness of the emulsion, depending on the characteristics of that baryta layer. They're comprised of a gelatin binder as opposed to albumin. Gelatin is a commercially prepared protein. But like albumin prints and like many photographs, they are prone to fading and deterioration. Oh. That didn't drop. Okay, but that doesn't, I'll show you another one, I hope. That you can see one that's deteriorated. And certainly you've probably seen this in your own collections, where these black and white prints become more greenish yellow in color as they deteriorate. And they tend to start to look more brown than black and white. This is an example of one in very good condition. And then finally, you know, again, just hitting the high points, there's so many different photographic processes, but you most certainly will have chromogenic color, color photographic materials in your family collections. And these, as I mentioned earlier, are based on the light sensitivity of silver halides, but the final image material is actually organic dyes, cyan, magenta, and yellow. And these dyes fade in the dark, and they fade in the light, and therefore they require cool or cold storage to prevent dye fading. They also tend to, in the 50s at least, certainly you begin to see these yellow borders, which is sort of typical of some of the deterioration that you see with color photography. 5, 10 minutes? Okay, all right, I'm good. Okay, and so what's happening to him? This poor guy. I always look at that, and I think we had a TV like that at one point. Anyway, so what's happened to this photograph? It's much more magenta because the cyan, the blue, and dye has faded. It's very yellowed throughout. And of course, it has damage to the paper support as well. Many of these papers were resin coated, that is, paper coated on both sides with polyethylene. So you might have heard them referred to as plastic coated papers. In terms of resources, one that I wanted to be sure to draw your attention to is this really wonderful graphics atlas. And the website is here, and certainly we can share that with you. And it's an interactive tool that allows you to begin to better understand all these different processes, what they look like, what these photographs look like in raking light, what they look like under magnification, so you can begin to determine whether you have a cyanotype in this case or an albumin print. Of course, this is a much easier process to differentiate. The cyanotype is typically blue in color, and the final image is actually the blue pigment Prussian blue. But there are many photographs that are very difficult to distinguish, and it's really a wonderful, interactive, very well done website that I urge you to examine. Photographs can also, of course, be negatives. We're not going to talk about that necessarily, but I hope many of you have negatives in your collections as well. And photographic albums. And here the key is to keep these as an album, not to disassemble them, but find a way to store them in protective boxes, because the album, as was true with the photograph I showed you of Grandma, she had so many different albums, and the way that they're comprised and the order that the pictures are presented is as important as the photographs themselves. And so preserving albums as units is very important. Finally, just some quick advice on preservation of these materials. Photographs should be housed in good quality paper or plastic sleeves. Plastic materials that are considered suitable for the preservation of photographs include polyester, polyethylene, and polypropylene plastics. You should avoid plastics like polyvinyl chloride. You can also use good quality papers that are neutral, that are made of cotton fibers, don't have additives. And the idea is to surround these photographs with materials that will protect them from the environment and from pollutants in the air, and to house them with materials that will protect them from handling. You can house them in boxes, and any kind of storage is suitable, really. I mean, if you can get something that's acid-free, good quality boxes, as you see here on your right, that's certainly preferred. And then, in your own home, to try and house these in areas where the environment is as controlled as possible, an interior closet, for example, not in the attics, not in the basements. And that will do wonders also to preserve these. I want to emphasize again, though, that as you work to preserve these photographs, be sure that you spend time with your family understanding who these individuals are and saving those stories as well, because that's what this is all about, really. It's not just the images, but the stories that they tell. So interior closets, controlled temperature, and relative humidity. We typically recommend 30 to 50% relative humidity, but that may be impossible in your own home. Or so you want to do whatever you can. And of course, by boxing these materials, you're protecting them, buffering them from fluctuating environmental conditions. Finally, seek advice from experts, local museums here in Istanbul. Certainly conservators who work in these institutions can advise you and sort of get you going in the right direction. The Arab Image Foundation in Beirut, Lebanon, has some wonderful information on their website and can be very helpful to you in terms of the preservation of photographic materials. Be sure to be prepared for emergencies in your own home. This might be leaking pipes or other natural disasters. In institutions, we are constantly working with them to develop emergency plans so that they are well prepared to deal with disasters. In fact, very sadly, I got a message right before I came here. We are also doing a major project in Iraq, working with Iraqis in the preservation of their cultural heritage in an institute that we've built in Erbil in an old library, and they had a fire a couple hours ago, actually. Everyone's fine, everyone's safe, the building is okay. One of the rooms has really been damaged. It was electrical wiring, they suspect. No one had any warning, no one had any idea. Luckily, no one was hurt. But what they said is they had a plan, and that all the artifacts, nothing was damaged, everything was saved. And there was a plan, even within this training institute, of what to do in the event of a disaster. In your own home, be sure that you have plans as well. Finally, in terms of light levels, some of these materials, of course, will fade upon exposure to light. So you want to matte and frame photographs and glaze them with ultraviolet filtering glass or plexiglass, something that might filter out ultraviolet lights that will cause these images to deteriorate, particularly objects that are hand-colored, as you see on your right, and some of the many digital processes that may have poor light stability as well. You can also not hang them in direct sunlight, close the curtains, and do what you can, or consider hanging facsimiles instead of the original materials, and housing the original materials in boxes and closets. But one thing you don't want to do is just put these away so no one sees them. I mean, the idea is to enjoy, again, these photographs and to treasure them. There are all different kinds of really wonderful resources and publications and on the web. Here are two really great general books, Photographs of the Past, Processes and Preservation by Bertrand Lavadrine, who's here in the audience as well. And this book has been translated into a number of languages and is just a great resource for identifying various photographic processes, how they were made, and what can be done to preserve them. And then looking at photographs, the guide to technical terms, is also very helpful to understand some of these different processes. And this is a publication from the Getty. If you have questions, if I can be of help in any way, don't hesitate to visit our website. I chair the Art Conservation Department at the University of Delaware, and you can find my email there as well. And finally, I offer my thanks to all of you, and certainly, especially to SALT for hosting us, and to our participants who are all here to hear us one more time, who come from all over the Middle East and from Iran and Turkey, Northern Africa. And it is such an honor and such a pleasure to work with them. So I thank them for coming as well. I'm now going to turn this over to our colleague, Tayfun, for your presentation. You don't need this, though, right? No. Okay, so thank you.
Hello everyone. Because of the busy agenda of Istanbul, I have been holding interviews for the last 10 years, and we have many guests here because of the Biennale. And I have noticed that one of the most frequently asked questions to me is, while working on archives, what kind of methods do you use? As different from the other previous speakers, I'm not working as a restorator. I'm working with my responsibility as an artist, and my relation with the archives is not only handling them physically, but also handling them emotionally, and I'm looking for the methods in this regard. And I will talk to you about two projects which are known in Turkey. The most important aspect of these projects is the method that is applied, and they have no relation with each other with respect to conservation. The book has been published from the same publishing house, and the sizes of the book are the same, and there is no other similarities between these two projects. One of them is, of course, Galatasaray, which is my recent project. I would like to talk to you about it shortly. From 35 to 85, Galata includes the whole film archive of Meryem Şahinyan, nearly 200,000. 10% of them are glass negatives, and all the film archive was digitalized from the scratch. The presentation of the project is composed of 3 layers. First layer is informatic. During the stage of formation of the project, there is a background of 3 years. And I have a video in which I'm summarizing these 3 years, and this is my working table, my tools on my table, and this is basically a film archive and how we could revive it with the limited facilities that we have. Glass plates. Throughout the project for 3 years, I worked with nearly 20 assistants, each of whom were coming from different fields: Department of Fine Arts, Department of Architecture, Department of Urban Planning. And what the young people thought was very important to me. On the video, on the left-hand side, my assistants talk about their thoughts, and the right-hand side video is Meryem Şahinyan's archive, and in here the process throughout the 25 years of storage is summarized by the collector, and we are seeing a high-tech, low-tech comparison because the computers are facing the physical archive here, not the whole physical archive, but part which we could present. The most important and striking feature for us is that the whole collection reached to us chronologically. I think very few studios in Istanbul have kept on operation for 60 years. Another interesting aspect of this studio is it covers the period when photography was changed very frequently, almost every decade. And from 35 to 85, Meryem used and did not change her camera, her methods, or any other tools that she had. And therefore, the physical archive is also a sculpture, because she took black and white throughout her life, and she used the same sized glass plates, and she kept on doing the same thing as an artist, and she never cared about the technological innovations and developments. It was a very conservative one. Therefore, we are seeing 1/3 of the collection over here, and facing that, inside the boxes, you are seeing the archive chronologically, and the digital versions are present in the computers. We have some tags, demographic structures like weddings, communions, and other ceremonies. For example, you want a woman who is wearing a hat in an Orthodox wedding between 35 to 40. You put in your entries and you can find the woman wearing a hat in an Orthodox wedding between 35 and 40. Each photo may include tens of texts, and the hats are even changing, different types of hats, and it depends on your relation with the fashion and your relation with the archive, and the audience may also add the text. If there is something that we missed, the audience might also add a text to the photos that they look, and therefore the database was extended all the time. Comment is also different. For example, if you know someone in the photo, then you can enter that information. Different people may say that the same photo belongs to different people, but if you claim that you are familiar with that person, you could put that in. And in parallel with that, we had photo tagging days, and during those days in this auditorium, from 9 to 5, we were inviting customers who have a relation with Photo Galatasaray, and we had open tag days. Most of them were the elderly people, and sometimes, like the example of your grandmother, one person could know 100 people, because if there is 15 or 20 people in one wedding photo, if you can find one of the persons in that photo, he can tell you the other people in that photo. And this part is the third stage of Photo Galatasaray archive. It is important to me as well, because this is the only presentation based on my decisions. There are 10 LCD screens. It's a multimedia installation. Am I speaking too fast? Or in fact, I'm speaking slowly? We are seeing 10 LCD screens, and there are totally 100 layers. On each screen we have 100 layers, and there are totally 1000 images in this installation. This is a round room. You enter in the middle, and the room is covered with black curtains. There is no other light, and in synchronization with one another, the layers are shown. The religious people, the women with the same portraits. It takes around 20 minutes, and within this 20 minutes you see a selected presentation from 200,000 photos. You can see part of the categories in the book, but some of them are only given in this multimedia installation. Another presentation, OSEP, it's totally different. I wanted to begin with Photo Galatasaray because no print was used inside Photo Galatasaray, and it's a photo exhibition in which photo is not printed, everything is digitalized, and it was comprising of films. It's different in Studio OSEP. Totally original materials are used in OSEP. It's also comprising of 3 layers, but this time the photographer's original film archive was fired, and photographer closed his studio. He went bankrupt. In the last 20 years of his life he had to change many addresses, and the remaining photos, like memories, it's not a real archive indeed. Some of the remaining photos were wetted, some of them were eaten by rats and mouses, and some of them were used for different purposes. And in this environment, what does conservation mean, and how could it be done? The first sensitivity for me was not to touch at all. In this exhibition, I didn't touch anything, I didn't clean, and I wanted to show it without any distinguishing. We are seeing the biography section here. In here, it's not an original archive, and it's the personal story of Osep. This part is where he is described, and the photo is in the middle, of course, but there are also documents and letters as well as the photos. That section was the biography layer, and this layer is retrospective layer, but do not consider it as retrospective. They are placed here ironically because it can't be a retrospective one indeed, because not all of his works have been able to reach today. We thought how we could exhibit his remaining works. Shift to colored. As different from Mariam Şahinyan, Osep was very interested in technology. He was investing all of his money in technology, and he was the most popular studio then in Istanbul. Contrary to Mariam's archive, his techniques, his films, his cameras were changing every 5 years. This is what remains to us in the retrospective layer. Also, you see the cards, the business cards of the people who were famous in the 70s and 80s, and we face the real Osep here. And this time he describes the retrospective archive himself. Osep recalls, based on his associations and recalls. On the other hand, we see how he could not remember many other things. It's part of kind of showing his loss of memory. When the audience came here, he faces the living Osep and listens to the real story. We used light boxes here from original films, and this part includes his diapositives. Am I exceeding my time? Also a presentation of Mariam. There are different categories that we formed. The most important feature of her studio is the studio serves the woman. It doesn't have a display on the street, and you can see childhood, school years, marriage of a person, one person. You can observe the woman history, in fact, here. And Mariam's studio was very special and protected, and we are seeing an example of them. They all were friends of Mariam, and they were taking these photos very easily, and we can see that she also put lines on the photo, or takes photos before and after shooting, because they changed very often. All of them were friends, therefore we could see some photos from the archive which are actually not photos, or you see that the same siblings have been taken instantly, mothers holding them in the background. Also, the photos also indicate the background of the studio to us. There is a mother, and it has been retouched roughly. She didn't want to appear in the photo, and we never gave place in our presentation. I'm only showing them to you. Mariam Şahinyan, just like Mariam Şahinyan is giving photos to the customers, we try to show them in the presentation and exhibition as well. Also, the studio was used like a home because sometimes they brought birthday cakes to the studio. Families. I'm showing them very fast. A sheep in the studio. As compared to Mariam's being humble, Osep was a very popular person. And there is a distance of 250 meters between these two studios, and they were working during the same periods. But Osep Minasoğlu used white cube for the first time when the studios were using decorations, the carpets and the palm trees in the background. He was more interested in the physical movement, and as contributed by Osep, they were reformulated and they worked for that. And in that, of course, the customers also matter, because Foto Galatasaray was a demographic studio, and Osep Minasoğlu's Studio Osep, was not a demographic one. It was close to public. Not many people from the public went in, and when they wanted to go in, they were not allowed. And in the whole studio, there is no wedding photo, there is no child photo, there is no family photo. It's like two faces of the same street back in that. And Osep. Some of them were very famous. 70s were migration period, and many people were cheated with the promise of being famous or celebrities. We couldn't hear some of them, and we see Osep here. While Osep was doing such things, Mariam was carrying out some other works on the other side of the street. And his studio was totally 700 square meters. It was one of the widest studios of Istanbul. And he used his facilities in this way. And shortly about this, there are categories in our books. On one hand, we were forced to give place to them, which I call dramatic sections, because we are talking about Mariam Şahinyan and her identity of being an Armenian and her relations with the community of Armenian, and a title of religion. She was a religious person, and her closest best friends were nuns, and we of course had to talk about those. And as different from them, on this archive, Mariam's being an Armenian woman or Christian, we see more migration, transformation, fashion, similarities. The ones looking from the mirror, they are all unique to Mariam, like collections inside collections. Mariam Şahinyan never changed her technique of shooting. Today, we are able to look at all of those photos more closely. They are simply not photos for us. We are seeing a similarity, two kids wearing the same thing, and also a woman holding the photo of a relative that she lost. We can see the brand of the watch and the tattoo on her hand, and they created our categories in a way. We were lucky about Mariam Şahinyan. It's a luckier archive as compared to Osep. This is one of the most worst photos in the archive, and on them we didn't have the opportunity to restore the physical materials. We could simply clean them. After digitalization, we carried out digital restoration, and here we have some historical deformations, and we didn't touch them as much as possible, but the lines, the tears, a piece of hair or dirt, we cleaned all of them digitally, and after cleaning they all remained this way. Also a copy from films, because many people, this is an intervention on the film, he wanted to have a portrait. It's both a portrait and a family photo, and we see the same thing here. We didn't touch them as well. As you know, they are painted red. In fact, they are red. And we can look at the content of the photo and what we can see inside one photo. This is not my own computer, and I couldn't find the magnifier. But when you magnify it, you can see another baby photo on her necklace, and you can see the facial expression of the baby very clearly. And on the left hand side you can see the title of the soldier. These are all categories for us. And also one of the most interesting differences of him from the other photographers then is that he bought all of his materials from abroad, and the collages he did on the photos, they were taken differently than the films were combined with one another. And another example of that. Also, we didn't touch the interventions on them. I'm over my time, and I would like to continue with Q&A session. There are many other things I can say about the projects, but I think we can expand the subject with questions. That's all for now. Thank you.
Don't be shy. Does anyone have questions for any of us? Yes.
Öncelikle herkese teşekkür etmek istiyorum.
First, I would like to thank everyone. My question is for Tayfun. And what about the current status of Foto Galatasaray? You always talked about the past, and I'm wondering the present status. Is it possible to access to the archive, or is there any exhibition display of photos? And secondly, as you also said, it's a great archive which describes the historical process, and I think it could be a subject of many thesis studies, or it could inspire many papers. So is it possible that any researcher may use that archive, and what you plan for the future? digital copies might be used by the researchers, but in parallel with the presentation of archive, we had another objective. We wanted to open the whole archive to public on a website. We still work on that, and it should continue this way. I think there is a decision to be made by the institution, because Foto Galatasaray is not only one single collection, and the open archive will not be lasting forever. Maybe we should have a system so that we could cover all archives. Our goal is to open a presentation on Salt Galatasaray website, but if we need to put such an effort and work for such a database, it should not only be open to not only about Foto Galatasaray, but also Ali Sami Güryen archive and AKM exhibition. I mean, all the materials that we have here should be given in the database, and also we can say we are involved in a process of creating that. But when a researcher comes, they can access to the entire digital copies, and I would be more pleased if we can share it with the public, because there are people in Argentina, in all the other continents of the world, who have photos in Foto Galatasaray. Thank you. And I would like to extend the answer of Tayfun. Of course, there is a basic difference between the archives of Foto Galatasaray and the other ones. Ali Sami Güryen is open to research in-house, and very soon, once the safety and security tests are completed, you will be able to access to all the digital archives from Delaware or from Africa or somewhere else. Tagging Foto Galatasaray is more complicated, so it should run with its own software. It's another challenge over there.
Regarding, you just showed the Le Gray, Nora, I think, yes. You showed the Le Gray photograph, which you kind of retro-engineered in a way to produce that effect. I mean, could you speak a little bit about this kind of retro-engineering, the printing process, and why you would want to do this, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I will say that the last image that I showed was the one that sparked that research. When that arrived in the collection, the curator and I were discussing it, and I called it a slightly deteriorated salted paper print, and he objected to that because it's a work of art, and of course I was not contesting that. So we began looking at Le Gray's publications. The great thing about him is that, I mean, A, he's a very significant photographer in the history. B, he trained many other significant photographers. And C, he wrote manuals. So we had some directions to follow. These were done in the salted paper process, so it's in a way a very straightforward, one of the earliest processes where you have a sheet of paper, you salt it literally with table salt, sodium chloride, and then make it light sensitive with silver nitrate. Now the differences with Le Gray were that he very much overexposed the image. When he placed the negative in contact with that sensitized paper, he would leave it out in the sun for a very, very long time, much longer than other photographers at the time. And then he would take his fixed bath, and again, for the photographers, you know, this will be clear, but he would add silver nitrate to the fixed bath, so it ended up not being a clear liquid, but an almost sludgy, you know, dirty-looking liquid, and he used that to fix his photographs. So ultimately, what he was ending up with was a toned photograph. It wasn't just a silver image; it was a sulfur-toned silver image, which gives that color and also makes it quite permanent, actually. And in his manuals, he talked about the different chemistry that you would use if you were making a portrait and wanted a certain color, or if you were doing an architectural view to obtain a color like those that I showed. Does that help? Okay.
I'm fascinated by the evolution of photographic techniques, and maybe more so by their apparent globalization since the 1830s or the 1840s. My question is how often you encounter regional variations that are unique in photography as conservators, and whether or not certain of those processes might be better suited for the environment in which they're placed into service.
That's a great question. And one thing you see, certainly the dates of popularity differ on some of the processes in different parts of the world. So an example, the albumin prints introduced in 1851 and really dominates in the United States from 1855, 1860 to 1890. And those dates change in different parts of the world, but you still find albumin prints, as far as I know, in the places that I've been. They still tend to dominate in the 19th century. However, in Eastern Europe, for example, in Russia, we're involved in a project there at the Hermitage Museum, which is focused on training conservators in photograph conservation. And when you look at their collection, which is rich, at the turn of the century, turn of the 19th century, they tend to be primarily collodion, chloride printing out papers, both matte and glossy. And this is a process that you do find in other parts of the world as well, but it clearly seems to dominate in Russia and in Eastern Europe. Why is that? I'm not entirely sure, except that it was very popular. Some of the papers were produced in that part of the world. Another example, when you go to Australia, sometimes Nora and I encountered when we were there teaching these large glass plate collodion positives that we have not really seen in the United States at all, that seemed to be popular, I guess, in the 19th century. In the United States, we tend to have small, what we call amber types, collodion positives. In Australia and New Zealand, these are much larger. So they certainly were popular. I don't know if it has to do with what was available or just popularity at the time. There are, therefore, certain processes that you see all over the world, which is why this training works very well in different parts of the world, because you can begin to address these different materials, but certainly some materials dominate different time periods. Anything else?
Yeah, it seems, I mean, probably some of you in the audience know even better than I, but there are certain countries where when photography was introduced, they missed an entire process. So for example, in Japan, there are very few daguerreotypes, and it's partly that, you know, they caught on at the later time period. There are also interesting things that, for example, the inventors of photography, Daguerre is French, and yet daguerreotypes predominated in the United States. We introduced the ambrotype, and I would say the best ambrotypes are in England.
Yeah.
And then the salted paper print was first introduced in in England, and the French have outstanding salted paper prints. So there was a bit of shifting around that happened there, but you know, that's a little hard to explain.
Yeah, it's such a great question, Walter. But the other thing that you see that Nora's referring to too is just the whole commerce side of photography. And some of these processes were patented in certain countries and they were not in others. And therefore photographers, of course, would try and use processes where they didn't have to buy a patent and pay those fees. And that, and there's so much research that can be done. You all can take this question and run with it, because we're all getting old. And but there's a lot of work that has to be done, and we need to understand what dominated these different areas, and whether it was based on materials that were available or patents that were available, or what the situation was. We're anxious to do this work in sub-Saharan Africa and to see what we'll find in those collections, where those collections are, and the kinds of processes that dominate in that part of the world.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. And it's a question to Tayfun Serttaş. So we
Yeah, I think so.
of different processes. I try to be a little more precise. Are we going to lose something? Or what are we going to lose if you are losing something within the content of a photograph? We know that the ambiguity of the photograph is done by the image itself and the support of the image. So we know that the content of an image or let's say an image on papyrus is just different than the content of an image on a Gutenberg print. So what are we going to preserve if we digitalize, and what are we going to lose when we digitalize the images? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
In fact, it depends on in which context you approach in the collection that you are interested in. If we need to talk about Photo Galatasaray collection, we didn't have any photographic concerns. More than photography, what is important to us is it requires putting photography back. It's more about the city history of Turkey. It's about the demographic transformation between the period of 35 and 85, especially as specific to Istanbul. Many other traumas between these periods. About 3 military coups d'etats that Istanbul and Turkey faced in these periods. I can say that I'm not a photographer. I didn't study photography, and I never approached photography within the concept or context of photography. And as for the photographs in which I am interested in, they never had been accepted as artistic in photography world. They were always said to be and labeled as cheap, but it created a breach between the social fields. So what I look for in studio photos is more than the photo discussions of photographic, is its relation with the cultural and historical field. That's why photo is important to me, not the photo and object of photo itself. And we didn't have any of the prints in Photo Galatasaray. We were forced to digitalize the films, and when you digitalize 200,000 images, you would need a football stadium, and it would be about an installation, not about the historical discussion of the photo anymore, but about displaying 200,000 images in the middle of the city. And this is not what we desire to do, so the digital copies were an obligation for us in such a huge collection. And in OSEP, I did what you said. I didn't touch anything. All the historical damages, and OSEP had put his tea glass on some of the photos, and I saw the traces of the cup on the photo, and they were valuable for me. It's about the own medium of the photo, and it was more related to that. But in Photo Galatasaray, it was more related to metadata and a different context.
Can I just say something? something sort of related to that. I mean, this is a challenge that we face in conservation around the world. It's different from your question, but this whole issue of digitization and the original. And so in this case, you know, Tayfun has sort of explained his process and his thinking behind that. But it is true when you digitize images that image is important for its content, but in museums and libraries and archives, which is very different from what he was doing, our goal is to preserve the original and the digital copy as well, because you do lose surface character and texture and those kinds of subtle differences that you see in photographs. And so it's a real challenge because there are many institutions around the world, and we learn about them all the time, that are digitizing their collections and disposing of the original materials, negatives, and prints, thinking that the digital copy is all that needs to be preserved.
One more observation. When you refer to let's say the photographic object as original, I understand that photography is the photographic object, because I, of course, I am interested in all the historical and critical literature about the image, and we have plenty of. But I think that still we are not enough concerned with the photographic object. If I may say that with respect, of course towards you, I wouldn't talk about original, because what does original mean? If we use these terms, then we are going to lose little by little the memory of the essence of the thought. And what I am concerned very much is the fact that photography, or better, the photographic, is it is identified with the real material physical object. That's what I'm saying. So I wouldn't talk about original, because also, and then I finish, because also the digital reproduction is an original, though, right? Because it's only the, am I wrong or not? I don't know. Because it's only a changing of medium then.
No,
okay.
it definitely, it depends very much on your perspective. I work in an art museum, so there's the term used, vintage, the vintage print. And those tend to be the ones that are most highly valued by curators, the vintage print. So the vintage print would be maybe the print that was made closest to the time that the negative was produced, and by the photographer, because they had a vision of the materiality of that object and how it should look, how it should feel even. But we're stepping into the future now, and the waters are changing. It used to be a photograph would arrive at the museum, I would check it for its condition. Now sometimes an artwork arrives at the museum and it's a CD. But that isn't the artwork. That is not the artwork. The artwork is the information that is on that CD. And in fact, in the preservation of that artwork, you are not preserving the CD because that is impossible. That's not going to last very long. You actually have to migrate the information that you can't see unless you put it in some equipment. You have to migrate that forward as the technology changes. And believe me, as a traditionally trained conservator, this was a very bizarre concept the first time I had to face it. What? You know, I'm not treating this original object. So things are changing. And I do think that, you know, the scanning of archives and so on, it's true, it's not replacing the object, and it's not replacing holding the photograph that the photographer held, or seeing the ring of his teacup on that object. But the great advantage is, as Tayfun says, that you suddenly have a completely new access and a completely new view on the entirety of a photographer's work. And that is a great advantage. One of the challenges is that digital media is not long-lasting, and it requires funding to be maintained. You have to start planning immediately for its long-term preservation. So that's something to think about.
Our goal in this training, in this education training where we all learn, ourselves included for sure, whether we call it original or not, and your point is well taken, but is to focus on what these objects are, how they were made, how they deteriorate over time, why they must be preserved, and how to make them accessible. And so all of it is so important, right? Because we need to engage everyone in this process. They have to understand and believe in the value and the significance of these original objects, and they must be preserved. But through digitization and these images, we may make them more accessible and more available and be able to be a better advocate for their significance and value as objects. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
I would like to add something onto that. I'm not a conservator, I am an artist, and I didn't tell you about my profession at the beginning. Maybe it's a technical mistake of mine. In Turkey, I'm also known for these projects, but my specialization is updated art, and I am producing in this field, and I am interested in the archives in parallel with my profession. I had postgraduate study on interdisciplinary studies, and it was about the studios and photo collections in Istanbul, and my relation with the archive is about the presentation of that and the relation it will have with today, the present. And the responsibility of physical archive is a different responsibility. I'm not an expert and specialist in that area, and because we don't have any experts in Turkey, I am doing that with my assistants. There is no other place. The photo academies in Turkey are only for shooting photos, not for preserving the photos. When you go to an academy and when you discuss it with a professional in the area, even the best photographers do not know how to protect and preserve their own collections, and Turkey has too much problem in this regard. And among them, I have a hybrid position, I think.
I might add to that I think individuals like Tayfun are doing conservators a great favor, because they are bringing these archives out into the public eye and giving them a new life and giving them new meaning. And I think this is going to help us enormously in raising awareness about the importance of these photographic archives and about the importance of preserving them. So I think, honestly, we're working hand in hand here to some degree.
Arab Image Foundation olmasaydı bizim için, Arab Image Foundation olmasaydı şayet bizim için Foto Galatasaray içinden çıkılmaz bir hal alabilirdi. Hiçbir şey bilmiyordum. Yani cam levhalar ilk geldiğinde, çünkü OSEP'te cam levha yoktu, hiç yoktu. Ve OSEP için çok eski bir malzemeydi cam levha. Ama Meryem 1970'lere kadar cam levhalar kullanmaya devam etmiş. Çünkü kamera zaten öyle bir kamera. Ki cam levhaların da onda biri kırık. Yani tuzla buz. Ben ilk aylar boyunca elime bir tane fırça alıyorum. Camların üzerini temizliyorum. Çünkü 10 parçaya kırılmışsa toplayabileceğimi düşünüyorum. Tahminen. Diyorum ben bunları yan yana getirip scan yapabilirim. Ama öyle parçalar var. Artık onlar her bir parça mikro paramparça olmuş. Onları artık tamamen olduğu gibi temizliyorum ve o dönem bizim için kurtarıcı bir kurum oldu ve ben kendim bizzat giderek yerinde öğrendim ve geri gelip Türkiye'deki arşive tatbik ettim. O arada Türkiye'de bu konuda neler yapabileceğimi sorabileceğim ya da danışabileceğimi sandığım kurumlardan aldığım yanıtları da size hiç paylaşmayayım sizle. Yani o kadar garip kimyasal oranları, 100 yılın belki başından kalmış koruma yöntemleri, inanılmaz. Tabii ki, çünkü Arap Image Foundation bu işi çok pratik yapıyor. Yani siz en basit yöntemle suyu, etil alkolü karıştırıyorsunuz ve bu iş bitiyor. Ama siz Türkiye'de birisine buna inandıramazsınız. Onlar size çok garip kimyasal hesaplar verecekler ve sizden bir simyacı gibi çalışmanızı bekleyecekler. Tabii ki böyle bir gerçeklik yok pratikte ve aslında güncel metot dediğiniz şey de belki bu kontekste tartışılabilir. Burada çok eski yöntemler var benim bildiğim ama uygulamada fonksiyonel değiller. Ya da nasıl fonksiyonel olabiliyorlar bilemiyorum.
Or can they?
We've talked a bit this last week about creating opportunities for further education and training in Turkey. I mean, this is true around the world, in collaboration with the Arab Image Foundation and others, and how to do that. So if you all, not necessarily here at this moment, but have thoughts and suggestions and what might be possible and how it could be organized, we would be very interested in hearing about that.
We do love hearing about the interesting tricks that photographers have, all the weird and odd recipes, in part because it's interesting, but in part because it does explain often why something in their collection looks the way it does. There's always more to learn, always more to learn. Were there some comments in the back? Yeah, I think a couple of people.
I would like to know, how do you cope with the knowledge that people don't even bother to organize or keep their iPhoto files? How do you carry on?
Wait, so the question is, how do you carry on when you are doing digital photography?
No.
No.
It's actually...
Can you wave your hand? Who's it? Yeah.
It's me.
It's hard up here to see. Yeah.
All right. In the 21st century era, people are really careless, so they don't even care about their own heritage. They don't even care about how do they care their own image and photographs. So what does it take to keep going on doing your job? What are your main motivations?
Oh, our job, I see.
Yeah, our job, you go. I mean, that's easy. Because there are plenty of individuals and institutions who care deeply about these materials, and you have a chance to connect with them, and they have enormous passion. All the participants in MEPI this week are deeply committed to the preservation of photographic materials, and you bring them together and they connect and form stronger connections and opportunities and networks. So it's true, not every single person may care deeply about this, but people, in the end, I mean, when you see horrible natural and man-made disasters, particularly natural disasters, and people going back, what are they doing? They're going back to their homes to try and find their photographs. And so I guess I believe genuinely that people do care. That they may not be tracking things on their iPhone because they're completely unprepared or what's the word I'm looking for? Not in Turkish, but anyway, that they can't even imagine that something can happen to these images. You know, they just have no idea that these could in fact be lost. But I guess I believe in that people do care, and they care about preserving these. They care about those memories, and that you can find them and connect with them and use them as a fulcrum to create that awareness. It's important to do it in institutions, of course, because that's where many collections are housed. And bringing these people together will advance that knowledge.
I do think that one of the most important things about the MEPI project is getting people connected. And we have had challenges from the start in locating the individuals who really care about photography. So that can be frustrating for sure. I know Debbie and I are both optimists, so that that also helps. But I think also you gain allies. People come to your side and realize the importance of images, of photography, particularly when they've had a loss. You know, the first time somebody loses their iPhone and they haven't backed up their images, and they think about, you know, the 2 years of their life that they don't have anymore, or, you know, maybe they've sent it to other people, it's on Facebook or something, but, you know, then that's the first time they realize, okay, if I don't do something about this, I won't have these images.
Are there any MEPI participants in the audience that want to address that question?
Abdullah.
Abdullah, Tarek, anyone?
I want to answer his question.
Oh.
I don't know if you want me to answer that as well. In Turkey, apart from studio photography, most of the prints at the beginning of 20th centuries were sold as antiques. How much of them are present? I can't give you about that. After the Republic period, it's more different to us, and that raises my interest more. And the studios that continued after then became dysfunctional. After 20th century, the photography was accessible for many people. The studio photography ritual finished. Only there are studios for taking passport photos. For example, the people do not say, my son or daughter has graduated from the university, let's take him to the studio and take photos. It's no more present in Turkey. The 90s and my childhood was the end of those studios, and since then studios have been closed, and the archive of many of them were either destroyed or taken by the assistants, and no economic value can be given for those archives because they are not antiques. They always want to see Sebah or Abdullah Ferris, but when you take Mariam to them, for today's photo collectors or for the institutions interested in photography, it doesn't give any meaning. When I first began with CD archives in 1999, then I wrote my thesis. This is my thesis: photography and minorities in Istanbul. For 3 years, I worked with archives of nearly 20 institutes. What I saw was disaster. Totally destroyed photos in hospital. They were telling me this is the hospital archive. I opened the drawer and it's probably 60 years since it was last opened. I had one block which were glued with one another. They were the conditions. I am interested in interdisciplinary art, and I'm coming from an origin of anthropology, and I try to create an intermediate discipline. It was not easy at all, even after thesis, and I can't say it's easy today, but this is a way of challenge when you have your practice and when you spend your 3 years of your life, you try to revive it. This is maybe a lifestyle for me. This is my preference, and I think I will continue. But the issues that I deal with in Turkey is because I can't see the silhouettes in Istanbul anymore. We can protect walls, we can protect some archaeological sites, but in Turkey the demography, the societal structure has changed a lot. We need to see the people, we need to face them. This is very important. I wondered too much who these people were, and my publication house writes the story of these people, then I print the photos. That's it in many books, and I wanted to see what they really look like. That was my motivation, individually my motivation, because there is no such database in Turkey.
We've gotten a note up front that the translators have already been working for 2 hours, and we probably should bring this to a close. I don't know what the plan is, but maybe we can take one more question, and then we can convene. There's coffee in outside, so after that we certainly can answer questions one-on-one. Yes.
I have a question for Tayfun. In fact, you answered that partially. At the beginning of your speech, you said reviving the archives emotionally, and you have been saying your relation is not a simple conservator's relation, not only about cleaning it or keeping it under a certain temperature. I want to ask a simple question. Where do you think inside that process, where do you position yourself, especially your relation with Osep Minasoğlu and your relation with him? How did it change your perspective? While listening to the stories during production of them, you said you were exposed to hundreds of thousands of photos. Did it create any becoming foreign for you? It's about what I said at the beginning. I started with an emotional story, and I ended up at this table speaking to you. While doing that, my emotional motivation, I saw that it was not only solved with this. I found myself in Beirut. This is how it developed. Did it make me foreign? No, it didn't, because I always separated this emotional thing with the technical thing. I had some responsibilities, and number of films that I could digitalize as one person was limited, and that emotional thing still went on, and it was, I think I am a positive example. I wish everyone could continue this way. I didn't know Arap Image Foundation when I started. Osep gave me a framed photo of his mother and father in 2002. It's also given in the book. A wedding photo his mother took in 1910. Half of that was water. The mother cut one piece of her dress and put it on the frame. And he said, please hang it on your wall and protect it, because I will lose it because of changing houses so many times. And this is how I began. And that's why I'm talking here. Maybe that's why there is a different position. And as you know, Osep deceased.
So we should thank you for your kind attention. It was really terrific. We so appreciate all of you coming out. And for Nora and I, it's been a real honor to serve on a panel with you, Tayfun. And thank also the SALT Institute for the support of this and everything you've done to support our activities this week. It's been really terrific. It's a wonderful, wonderful facility. And it's been a real treat for us.
Final thank you to the technical team. You are top notch. And also to the wonderful translators. And just last thank you, Rima Mokayesh and Reem Hakel here from the Arab Image Foundation in the front row, who have made all of the arrangements, who have worked hard with the SALT team, and who are just amazing people. Thank you.